Welcome to our final broadcast for the WordPress Translation Week. And I'm here joined by Meg Phillips from the United States and Chris Churchill based in the Ireland.
Hello.
And I'm Abha Thakor and I'm based in the UK. So thank you both for joining us. And you've been working with WordPress translation this week to highlight what developers need to know. So it's really good to have you here to share a bit more about that. So starting off with Meg. Meg, we hear a lot of terms about strings and wrapping and what developers need to do. And we've had a comment this afternoon that we presume that we don't have to wrap strings in sandwich paper or something else. So someone was saying, I don't know what this means. What does it mean? So Meg, can you tell us a bit more about what it means and how developers can get to know some of the jargon?
Right. So WordPress has a built-in function, and it's _E, and then you just open a parentheses and put your string in there. And that function pulls those strings into sort of the polyglot workflow so that people who are not necessarily code writers can still go in and translate that for us. And that's just amazing, right? It's an amazing thing that we've built so that people who aren't developers can still participate in the translation of plugin code. And so it's not so much and Chris talked about this earlier, and I should volley this off to him, but it's not so much the content that goes into your plugin after it's built. It's the instructions for your users within the admin often of how they should use your plugin. So Chris, do you want to speak a little bit to that for me?
Yeah, sure, of course. It's all about in this particular case, it's all about making sure that the strings you put in are put into when you're echoing them out in PHP in a particular way. And that way needs to be, you shouldn't be hard coding them in. What you should be doing is you should be using the default functions that are there for you to make your life easier. And like you said, Meg, there's actually two parameters to that. There's the text itself, then you use what's called a text domain, which basically groups together all of the text within the plugin so that then an automated piece of software can go through the whole plugin, can bring it out, and exactly as you said, Meg, put it into the polyglots workflow at that point. And it's just, yeah, it makes it easier. Basically, if you have a CMS system, you should be using it, and this just gives it a place for it all to be, basically.
Yeah, and I was going to jump in over. Is that okay that I jump in?
Yeah, please do, Meg.
I was going to just add to that, Chris, that, when we were talking earlier, I made a comment about when you're a young developer, it might be easy to glaze past these things and to develop certain styles and habits that don't pay attention to the sort of the detail of why WordPress is so fantastic.
We all did, I think, didn't we?
Yeah. But there's nothing to be afraid of in terms of someone looking at your code and going, you forgot to do this, because really what it is every single developer is in a growth stage, right? So I'm still learning things, and everyone is still learning things. So don't be afraid to learn. Learning is an everyday part of being a developer. And so if you haven't been wrapping your strings, like Abha said, it's not sandwich paper, it's just learning a new habit. And what do they say about habits? Like, Abha, is it 3 days to form a new habit or something?
Yes, I think so. And the easier you do this, I think it helps to get it into that memory, doesn't it? We talk about translation memory, which is about how languages and translation have already happened, and how people can use that. But also it's about developer memory. I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
That things that we've learned and then we practice and then it becomes second nature. Yeah. That we will put this bit in the string. We won't put this bit because we've learned not to do that. And it's also making sure that we avoid the habits that make our code not as usable for other people, particularly if you're working in an environment like open source. So, Meg, you talked about this idea that people can improve from their original development stage, and that obviously might be as they've come into the profession younger, or it may be that they've gone on to become a developer later on in life.
Right.
So would you advocate that translation and thinking about translation and preparing your code for translation becomes part of a checklist that we all actually follow.
Absolutely. I think that, I like to think of it as like a pre-flight checklist, and I have certain things that are on my pre-flight checklist. Chris and I talked a little bit earlier about the different styles of writing PHP, but I tend to put all of my sort of strings into these big PHP variables anyway. And if you make that a habit, it's easy to just put that right into your translation string. And then I just want to go back, Chris, to we talked about namespacing. So if you are a plugin developer, WordPress has finally come out and made the official recommendation that you should be namespacing your PHP anyway. And thinking about your text domains at the same time that you think about how am I going to namespace this plugin, it kind of gets you already thinking about those things as you sit down to write. And those are habits that, I certainly, when I wrote my first WordPress plugin, I wasn't thinking in that way, but I've learned to. And it just is developing good habits from the start, whether you are starting out from your first boot camp or you're starting out after 10 years of writing PHP and you're just coming to WordPress. They're just new habits, good ones.
I'd go so far as to say it's not even a checklist. It's just part of it's part of the habit of writing. If you get into the habit of writing, it shouldn't be an afterthought where you go back and do it. Just do it as you're working your way through it, basically, is the best way to do it.
And I think from the workflow perspective, it's actually harder to go back and amend your code later on. It's not impossible. And I think if people need to do that so that their plugins can be accessed in other countries, why not? And the more you do that, correction and amendment or update, however we want to describe it, it will get easier. And I think that then makes you practice, and it's in your mindset for the future.
And I think,
sorry,
go ahead, Chris.
Go ahead.
I think that when you're writing a plugin, I wrote a lot of plugins in my work before I ever submitted my first plugin to the repository. And I think that I would just encourage every developer, no matter how small the plugin, go through that process, because you learn a lot about WordPress and the people and the community by going through that process. And I think you'll find that the plugin review team are very kind and gentle. Even if you pop in with an overly cheery attitude and you read the manual but didn't follow it, they're nice to you. So just don't be afraid that they're nice, and they'll just refer you back to what you should be doing and the habits you should be forming.
Chris, in terms of writing code that actually thinks about translation, is there anything else that you'd recommend developers read up on, or that they actually should follow?
They should be following the internationalization functionality on the WordPress Codex, developer.wordpress.org. You can find it on there. I'd also recommend you use boilerplaters, plugin boilerplates, or plugin generators in general. They do most of the text domains for you off the bat. They'll give you that basic format on how to follow a standard, not necessarily, which we could debate what is the right or what isn't, but they'll give you a decent framework to work from, which will include things like the text domain. It'll include things like the namespacing. It'll include things like we can wax poetic on whether it's the right way to do it or the wrong way to do it, but at least it'll cover 90% of your bases when you're starting out to some degree. Meg, you disagree?
It's not that I disagree. It's just that I think that there are a lot of different styles of boilerplate, and they're all, many of them can be right. So as you're considering that, you definitely want to make sure that you're scaling the size of your boilerplate to the size of your plugin. So you don't want to unnecessarily bloat your plugin code. It's one of the things I love about Hello Dolly is that, Matt set the standard for how lightweight a plugin really can be with WordPress. So while we do need to be paying attention to accessibility and we need to be paying attention to translation and internationalization, we don't necessarily have to create 35 files to build a plugin. It can just be one PHP file. And so as a very, very young developer, I think that it can be quite scary to look into some of those boilerplates that are out there. So if you're ever lost and scared as a new WordPress developer, go back to Hello Dolly, and it's a good starting point to just remind yourself that the plugin functionality is meant to be an easy way to hook into to WordPress and get what you need done. So I do like boilerplates, but scale them to your application rather than scaling your application to the boilerplate.
Very good advice, Meg. So just moving on from the mechanics, as developers, have you enjoyed seeing the translation week, and have you learned anything in particular that you will take back as a developer, but also as a community member?
As a community member, how easy it is to contribute and how we should be doing more as users of the software. I think we have a debt to it to be doing these things, and just getting involved isn't hard.
Yeah, and I think for me, one of the talks, and I don't remember exactly which one it was, but one of the talks that I sat in on as an observer, there was a lot of conversation about how, as a teen or a young person coming into code writing, if you are constantly faced with a foreign language, it can make you feel like other than, if that is a good way of saying that. And when it's in your own language, it makes you feel apart. So I think that really touched me deeply from the perspective of my children, feeling included in anything as they're coming up. So I think that it's good for inclusion and just to consider other people's personal respect, So
Chris, obviously you've now done your first translation and you translated into Spanish. And
I did.
Was that, how did you find that? Did you find that actually doing that for the very first time, and I know you weren't translating code, you were translating a video. Can you just give some people some tips about how to make that first step?
Reach out to someone that you know, get in, even if you're joining an after party or something, just ask, someone will help you, would be my advice. And everyone who's involved in contributing will be able to hook you up and be able to point you in the right direction. So just ask would be take the plunge. It's worth it. People are nice.
Have you enjoyed your early contributions?
Yeah, very much so. It's been fun, made friends, yourself, Abha, and Meg included here. Yeah, it's been wonderful, all in all. It has been. It's been an enjoyable couple of months since WordCamp Europe, basically. It's been wonderful. It genuinely has.
And I think your story is an interesting one because you didn't translate into a language that is spoken where you live. So I think it's a good example that you don't have to translate into a language that you're actually being surrounded by. If you have a native language, or if you have a level of translation that is good enough to translate into another language, you can take part.
Also, if you do most of the legwork, it'll still get reviewed by one of the polyglots anyway. So if you do most of the heavy lifting and most of that legwork initially, someone will still give it a once over and an eye, basically, anyway. So
that's a really good point, Chris, because it's much less intimidating when you know that there's someone who's sort of got your back to make sure that you don't do something really terrible in the end. Someone's there to catch you if you slip up on your translation too. That's a good point.
And I think that goes back to what you were both saying about, from a development perspective, is that being involved in an open source community, be it WordPress or another community, you can actually learn how to do things better and in a safe environment, so that you can also ask why and help
learn
that
how
learning.
to collaborate, it's learning about collaboration, isn't it, basically, and making friends along the way, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's really important because, you know, for many years, you know, I don't like to call myself self-taught, but I suppose I am in the sense of a development perspective. And so I worked alone for a lot of years, and it wasn't until I really started to learn how to reach out in through the open source world that I was able to grow into a far better developer. So whether that's through
self-taught, I'm an autodidact as well because I'm
Yeah.
self-taught. Exactly the same way.
Yeah. And I think that you find that participating in the open source community can give you a vehicle by which to learn from other developers without, and really, you know, I've never, so I would never say, I would never recommend someone to do that if I felt that you were going to be ostracized by some really mean developers waiting to swoop in and call you terrible. Like that's just not the WordPress way. And I haven't encountered that anywhere within this community.
There doesn't appear to be gatekeeping. The opposite, I would say.
Yeah. And for both of you, you've done code that has then been used in other environments. Meg, you've used it in Call for Code recently, and Chris, you've had lots of examples similar to that as well. So I think it's learning and sharing together, and I think that's what hopefully this week's been all about. So thank you very much, and thank you for agreeing to help with the Learn WordPress that we want to do for the webinars on this. And if anyone has any questions or wants to take part in how we can help developers, you know, get their code ready for internationalization, then we've got these two very lovely people who are willing to help collate your ideas, and they're going to be making the webinar that we put up on Learn hopefully in the next few months. So thank you both for joining us, and happy Translation Week to both of you.